Okay, let's get started. So again, thank you for joining us. And in today's session, we'll be talking about how to practice safe open source. My name is Rami, and I'm the CEO of WhiteSource, and you can see my contact details here, and feel free to contact me. During the session, we'll cover the following topics. First, we'll briefly tell you about the history of WhiteSource as a company and how we got started and why. Then we'll dive into how to practice safe open source. We'll review alternatives to open source practices and try to see how we can come up with the right choice of managing open source. I will then show a short demo of what the WhiteSource system looks like, and we'll sum things up. Since there are multiple participants, we cannot open audio for everyone, so if you have any questions, please type them in the control bar, and we will try to address your questions probably by sending an email with a full Q&A after the session. So with that, I'll start by sharing basically the story of the company's founders. The handsome one, by the way, is me. We met at a previous company called Eurekify that was acquired by CA in 2008. And during the acquisition, we found ourselves spending a disproportionate amount of resources and time and effort, especially in the R&D department, trying to figure out which open source libraries we were using, what licenses they were distributed under, and trying to demonstrate that we were not violating the requirements of those licenses and not bringing any sort of legal trouble along with the intellectual property of the company. Following the acquisition, after making a lot of manual effort to document all of the libraries and proving and providing CA with all of the requests, we started looking around for automated solutions because it seemed to us that that issue wasn't something special for us, but that it existed in every organization that was producing software, because in today's market, it's impractical to try and develop software without heavily relying on open source. So we've done some research and found that there were no easy and simple solutions for managing open source and making sure that the organization remains compliant with the licensing and tracks other open source related issues. And basically we founded the company WhiteSource on the premise of making the practice of open source easy and affordable to all R&D organizations worldwide. So let's talk for a second about practicing safe software development, not just open source. Normally, in any self-respecting R&D organization today, you would find that there are several tools and practices used to make sure that the code being developed is of high quality and low bug rate. Specifically, you would find almost always bug tracking systems, version control systems, and what's called static code analysis. That's very often used for tracking security vulnerabilities in the code. However, normally your own proprietary code is only a part of the software that you end up shipping to your customers, sometimes as low as 20%, where open source makes up the other 80%. And that open source tends to be widely neglected by R&D organizations for various reasons. So with that, we'll try to see how we can sort of implement similar practices that are conducted on proprietary code and see how we can translate the value of those practices over to the open source world, which is different essentially from proprietary code. But the 5 key aspects of practicing safe open source as listed here, and we will review each of them in a bit more details, are First, knowing what the R&D guys are using, which libraries are being used. Secondly, which licenses those libraries are distributed under. Thirdly, trying to understand those licenses, understand the requirements, understand the restrictions of what you can and cannot do with them, especially in a commercial environment. Fourth is knowing in due time when security vulnerabilities are found on those libraries and naturally mitigating them, and becoming aware of new updates that potentially fix bugs, security vulnerabilities, enhance performance, add features that you may like, and so on, so you can decide whether or not you'd like to implement the new version. But in order to do that, you first need to even know that it's there. And we'll start by discussing even, the most basic item that you need to cover, which is knowing what open source is being used in your software. So, you can think about it as just a meaningless task of listing all the libraries that are being used by developers, but open source libraries, being software on their own right, can depend on other open source libraries, which in turn depend on additional open source libraries and so on. And we've done a little research and found that, and this research was conducted on over 3,000 real commercial software projects, and found that in 64% of the times, the transitive dependencies that come with the open source libraries that the developers choose are licensed differently than the libraries those developers may or may not have even looked at. In other words, you can, even when you are conscious of open source licenses and when your developers are well educated, you can still find yourselves in situations where a seemingly benign library brings with it as a transitive dependency a problematic library or something that has a license that requires some more attention or at least some consideration before bringing in to your software products, especially in commercial products, and can put your intellectual property at some risk. Secondly, you need to know what licenses the libraries are distributed under. There are several different types of licenses. There is really no standardization in this area, even though the OSI is making a lot of effort to sort of break down and categorize at least the popular licenses, and they're doing a fine job, but it's still anyone's guess what the library is licensed under, because the author of the library is free to assign any license that they please to, and they own the copyright basically unless they decide otherwise. So there is a scale of permissiveness or restrictiveness of licenses. Some, or I would dare say even most of the times, there aren't that many issues in terms of compliance, but in a non-neglectable percent of the cases, there are restrictions. Some can be more serious than others, but all of them need to be watched and adhered to. Right. So just to reiterate basically that point, when a developer or a group of developers releases a piece of open source out into the world, they still own the copyright to that code unless they explicitly waive it by way of licensing it with an open source license. So those licenses are just like any other software license that you buy in a commercial environment, and from a legal perspective, they are a contract and must be respected and treated as a contract. And as you've seen in previous slides and probably know and heard from the news, sometimes these things end up in courts and can cause serious issues to commercial organizations and damage their reputation and business. On the topic of security vulnerabilities, You know, open source software is developed by software developers, and they are just as susceptible to security issues as anyone else. The nice thing here is that the open source communities are actually very good at tracking and fixing security issues, but there is generally a disconnect between the good work done by the communities and what the end users end up actually becoming aware of, or keeping track of, because it's very difficult to sift through the hundreds of vulnerabilities that keep coming out every week and then tying them to the specific libraries that your guys are using in your development environment. And if you want to try and do that manually, that's extremely resource intensive and time consuming to track. Some people do that, but it wastes a lot of time and a lot of attention inside the organization. And lastly, the issue of version updates. So open source being, at least the popular open source projects are composed of very large communities that always drive innovation and keep adding features and fixes, and they tend to be updated very frequently. Not necessarily every minor update is of interest to you, but some new versions can be critical, at least for security or bugs that can dramatically impact your own commercial software. And in order for you to consider updating, you first need to even know that these versions are out there. And again, that's a very difficult task to accomplish manually or by trying to have developers spend time tracking versions of various projects and libraries that are being used in the development lifecycle. Okay, now that we've covered what you need to think about when you are trying to govern your open source, let's consider what you would want, or at least expect to find, in a good open source component management solution. First thing, obviously, would be a full and desirably automatically created and continuously updated inventory of the components being used. Secondly, you'd want to know the licenses that those components are being distributed under and have some indication on which ones can pose greater or lower risk to you and to your organization. You would then need to create your adoption policy and be able to enforce it effectively. You may want to have different policies to different types of software depending on the type of distribution that software goes under. Specifically, if something goes out as a mobile app or as a web app, it may have different restrictions than if it stays in the back end or if it's only used as a desktop application and so on. So you need to decide on your policy, and you need an effective way to enforce it. You would like to know about security vulnerabilities proactively in two dimensions. One, when developers add new libraries, you would want to know if those new libraries have any security issues. And two, when a new security vulnerability is discovered on a library that's already being used, could be there for a year, 2, 10 years, but the security vulnerability was just now discovered, you would like to know about it and then make educated decisions on how you want to mitigate the security issues and move on with your software development. And lastly, you would like to get proactive notifications about new alerts that go out into the market that are relevant to you, right? Just for the libraries that are listed in your inventory, not about any odd library that's just getting an update somewhere out there in the world. And now that we've talked about what the desired features are, let's talk about what you would like to avoid. So basically, you'd want a system that's efficient in the sense that it doesn't take more time to operate than the time it saves by managing your open source. You'd like something that doesn't disrupt the developer's ongoing work, and basically you would want to take the load off of the developers and not add more headache to what they're already doing. And you'd like to find potential issues or potential risks as early as possible in the development lifecycle, ideally as soon as the developer is adding it or considering adding a library. You'd like to know all the risk analysis of that library and enforce the policy ideally in real time. Okay, so we know from years of experience that many companies out there try to achieve open source management and governance by listing the open source components on a spreadsheet. And there are a lot of issues with that, primarily that even though it seems like a lightweight solution, it's actually a lot of work. You'd still rely on your developers to be alert and to let you know when they're adding new libraries. If you want to have a complete inventory, you need to then send them to do research on the library and find out what the transitive dependencies are, what their licenses are, and so on. If you want to be up to date, you'd have to mandate that your developers do that continuously throughout the development lifecycle, which is very laborious. You'd still not necessarily have all the information on each library unless, again, you're willing to spend all of your precious developers' time on these, I don't know, administrative tasks. And you won't have an actionable compliance requirements or restrictions list that derived from that license inventory, or have information about security vulnerabilities when they are discovered. So with all of those flaws, I think it's fairly clear that using a spreadsheet is not an effective solution and certainly is not a good way to enforce your policy of open source. There are a few other solutions out there, all fall under the category of code scanning. Those normally would be very large, very expensive, and very complex enterprise solutions that take a lot of time, effort, energy, and professional services to install and to configure, and just as much work to operate and produce meaningful reports because of all the false positives. And I'll stop here for a second to explain what the inherent issue of code scanning is in this respect. I'm not going out against the practice of static code analysis, which works well for security and other issues, but when trying to discover open source code snippets that were embedded in your own code, the inherent problem is that code looks like other code. So when a developer adds a piece of code, there is a very good chance that it's going to resemble some other piece of code in some open source projects out there in the world. And the more open source projects there are in the world, and as you probably know, they keep growing all the time, the more likely it is that there's going to be this false match, which you will then have to review and possibly mitigate or report on or consider or consult legal and create a lot of time-wasting activities around these false positives. The other thing is that normally, because scanning operations are so heavy and so resource intensive, they cannot be handled in real time, certainly can't be done continuously in the development lifecycle, and are normally done before a release or periodically once a year, which tend to be the worst possible time to find out that you have issues because it's already very late in the game. You've completed your development, you are in a code freeze, you've done QA, you've done integration with other products, you've done maybe beta sites with customers and so on. And now having to pull out a piece of open source and then replacing it or coding around it or patching it is a very big ordeal, which can cause delays in time to market, serious issues, maybe loss of business to competition, and reputation. So the same basically goes to security vulnerabilities that on-premise solutions have a hard time getting real-time notifications about, and as well as new versions and new projects that go out into the market, not to mention the very high costs of just buying these products and trying to operate them. Again, normally they would come with professional services because it cannot be handled internally by the R&D team because of the complexity. Which basically brings us to the one viable solution that is applicable to companies of all sizes, which is the real-time automated management and control of open source that takes into account all three stakeholders for open source management in the company: the legal expert that want to make sure that licenses are tracked and that compliance works well and policies are enforced; security officers that want to be notified on security vulnerabilities quick and make sure that the fixes are applied; and most notably, the R&D team that wants to first and foremost keep doing the real work, keep coding and improving on their own product and not getting disrupted or being derailed because of non-R&D issues essentially that have to do with licensing or security issues with components that they are not directly responsible for. So quickly, what does WhiteSource do? We provide with a real-time open source licensing, security tracking, and compliance solution that's comprehensive, very, very easy and quick to set up, and provides you with immediate results. We can very easily integrate with your favorite development tools and environments and bring you all the value that you'd expect from an open source management tool very, very quickly and to the point, and we already have a growing family of happy customers worldwide, and we keep growing all the time. And with that, I think we have very little time left for the demo, so I'll try and run through it as efficiently as I can. Being a cloud-based software as a service solution, the entire WhiteSource service is accessible through your browser. It is comprised of a set of dashboards and reports that give different views of the open source inventory that can serve different members of your team or different tasks that you need to fail, you need to execute. What we're looking at now is the homepage of the service, or the organizational dashboard, that's divided into three parts. The top part is the alerts, which I'll get back to in a second. The middle part is a mini inventory broken down into products, so you may have multiple products in your company, and for each of those you'll be able to see the list of components with their licenses and a breakdown of risk factors for those licenses. And at the bottom are tickets for new components being added by developers and then being handled by the workflow and possibly the preset policies that I'll show you in a second. For each library, you get a lot more information, including all of the dependencies, all the versions that are out there, newer or older versions than the one that you're using, homepage info, bugging, and bug tracking, where the code is hosted, and so on. And you can drill down to the license and get some information, basically risk analysis of the licenses with some layman's terms to understand what the license is about. This is not a replacement for professional legal advice. It's just a way for someone in the company to get a quick glance of what the amount of exposure is from a legal perspective associated with the specific license. Going back to the alerts as promised, so once the system knows what the inventory is made up of, it can start generating insight into that inventory And you can see here different types of alerts, including the new version alert, the security vulnerability alert, policy rejection alert, and other types of more administrative alerts that show up. If we want to go into a little more details with the security vulnerabilities, we have a designated report for that lists all of the security vulnerabilities in the organization in one centralized report that lets you sort them by severity and can then make decisions on what you want to handle first. And you can also always drill down into a specific vulnerability to get the full disclosure, the the dates, the severity information, the impact on your system. So all the libraries that are impacted by these vulnerabilities in all of your projects would appear here, so you'll know the extent of exposure that you experience from this specific vulnerability. And to the right, you can see the list of references to potential fixes, workarounds, updates, or other things that can help you deal with this vulnerability. We also have a lot of other reports, most notably the inventory report that basically gives you a flat list of the libraries with a short description, license information, where it appears in various projects that you are developing, and the entire report can be exported to an Excel spreadsheet with a click of a button. And basically, it's very, very rapid setup and value because it takes no more than 10 to 15 minutes to connect our system to your favorite build tool, and you will be immediately able to produce this report and then demonstrate compliance and apply our policies. I haven't shown you policies, but we're out of time, to legal guys, to partners, clients, anyone that needs to see these reports. I'll just quickly say that we also have a system for defining acceptance policies based on licenses and other criteria. So for the most part, everything is fully automated. Developers can go about their business, adding libraries or doing the coding that they need to do, and our system takes care of enforcing your defined policy and then approving the libraries or the licenses that are okay with you and automatically rejecting the ones that are not okay with you and notifying the developers, making them replace the library as soon as they added it very, very early in the development life cycle and not after the fact where it's complicated and expensive and puts the company at risk. So just to sum up, open source tracking is very important. It's not any less important than tracking your own proprietary code and employing all of the safeguards that you employ to the proprietary code. There are a few choices for open source management, but they are not cost effective and very time consuming and burdening on the R&D teams. All of them require manual intervention and wasting your developers' time. There's only one that really provides you with a comprehensive real-time solution that's rapid to set up and basically provides you with full automation and reduces the amount of manual labor. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who's participated and taken the time to come and join us for this session. And I hope to see you in future communications as well. Thank you and have a nice day.